Welcome to Code with Kurt. In this video, we are working on a project called Invoice Generator. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating invoices and also storing some critical data that goes on invoices like customers, like name, company name, address, city, state, and zip. I'm also keeping track of items that you would put on a invoice with unit price. And then from there, I'm taking all this information plus added information that would go on an invoice and creating an invoice that would look something like this. And this is a provided Google Sheets template. They provide this to everybody. You can download it and get this. So how I started this project, I started with this sheet and I thought, how can I easily populate this and keep track of how I'm populating it with different customers and different parts. And I'm also keeping a log of each time I print one, so it keeps track of who I'm sending this out to for payment purposes, so you can keep track of who's going to send their payments back. So I'll demonstrate how this works real quick. So I'm going to go to invoices here. I'm going to select the customer. I'm going to select John Smith. And this simply comes from my drop down this table or this sheet here, and I could list a whole bunch of customers. So I'm going to go back and we go payable to, I'm just going to say myself, and then the project, I'm just going to put building. You put anything or you can keep it blank here. Date, I'm going to select it. We'll put something out. Put something out in the future. Let's say June 20th. A note, if you want to add a note, I'll just put test. So you can see it. Adjustments, this would be like discounts of your parts. I can put -$1 just to see how that works. I'm going to pick my items that I want on this. Say I want part 1 on here, a quantity of, say they ordered 3. I'm going to add it. It's going to add it down here. So I got this first part here, and say I want to add another one. Say I want to add part 5, and we'll just keep the quantity. So they ordered 3 of part 1 and 3 of part 5. Now I'm going to create it. So it's running. I could go over to my print copy. And here I got all my stuff in here. I got an invoice number 102, my 620, my building, payable to me, my 2 parts, my total 30, adjustments minus $1, $29, and my notes of test over here. So that's pretty simple. And then this top part is where you can put your company and your information here. Just type it in easily here, and then from down on, it'll populate everything else. And then this invoice number is I got it over here on my settings, which is keeping track of the next number to use. So we just used 102, this will be 103. Next I'm going to take you over to my invoice log, and I'm going to show you the invoice record that was set in. So you got your 102 John Smith with the due date, the issue date, and the total that was on the invoice itself. So this is just a simple way to keep track of the invoices you're sending out and a quick way to generating. And you can keep track of your items and your customers. And I can take you through a step-by-step process of how I put this together. I'll go through it pretty quick. And if you're interested in videos like this with Google Sheets and Google Apps Script, subscribe to this channel to see future videos. Now I'll get started in showing you how to put this together. Okay, I'm going to start on Google Drive. I'm going to select a new Google Sheet. When I select it here, I'm going to select Google Sheets. I'm going to come over this arrow. I'm going to hit from template. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this invoice template, because that's the basis of this video, is populating this sheet. So I'm going to click it. And that's how I start. I got my invoice sheet right here, and I can see it. It's already semi-populated. And what you could do now is you can set your company name up. You know, you can change it to my company with the address here. Just these things, set your company up. And the rest will populate through this program that we're going to build. So I'm going to call this sheet print. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to call it print. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to add some sheets here. I'm going to add invoices. And it's important to get if you're just trying to copy this, it's important to get the sheet names just the way I have it, because the script that I write, I call out all these names very specific. But if you're just going to watch this and kind of build your own thing, then you don't have to worry about that too much. So I'm going to keep adding sheets here. So I got my invoice. I'm going to do my customers. Okay, I have all my sheets set up here. I got my customers, items, my invoice log, my settings, and invoices is kind of my starting sheet. So I'm going to move this over here in front of the print, and I got my invoice itself. So I'm going to start by this sheet here, and I'm going to start populating the stuff that is needed. So I'm going to create a few buttons and do all the titles and everything. So there I have my invoices sheet put together here. The only two things I have to add is validation, data validation range here, and items. And I'm going to set my date. I'm going to come in back after I set my customers and items and invoice log and settings sheets first. So I'm going to go through and do these 4 sheets, kind of set all the titles up. There's nothing special about these 4, just setting the titles, and that's it. So I'm going to do that next. Okay, so I finished up setting up my customers, items, invoice log, and settings. Now I'm going to start by setting my first invoice number I want to start with, and then from there it's just going to increment by 1. So I'm going to start with 100,000. Next I'm going to go over to customers. I'm going to enter a customer to start off with. There I got one customer. I'm going to do another one. So now I got 2 customers listed that I can use and choose from. I'm going to add a couple items next. So I got a couple items listed with some unit prices. So now I'm going to go back over to my invoice sheet, and I'm going to set some data validations to bring in those ranges. So I'm going to start by customer. I'm going to go to data validation. I'm going to click here. I'm on a list from a range. I'm going to click here. I'm going to go to customers. I'm going to start highlighting this. I'm going to go down here, and now I'm going to change this to 1,000. So basically I can have 1,000 customers. So I can hit OK. Save. I can go over to invoices. And now I got my 2 customers listed. I'm going to do the same thing for items. I'm going to go data validation, list from a range, click this, go to items. I'm down here, highlight there, and change this to 1,000. Hit OK. Now I can have up to 1,000 items. I'll go back over to invoices. And now I got that populated. And the next I want to just do a due date. I want to do data validation on that, data validation. Yeah, I'm going to do date. I'm going to hit OK, save. Now that will do is when I double click here, it'll pop me up a nice little window where I could pick a date. So that is it. I set up all my sheets here with the proper data. Now next I'll have to move over to the script, and we're going to add the script, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste it and then just go through it, kind of each function by itself, and then after I go through that I'll attach the functions to these buttons. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to Tools, we'll go to Script Editor. We are now in the Script Editor. I'm going to name my project here. I'm just going to keep it as Invoice. And now I'm going to go ahead and paste all my script code in and then go through it. Go to the top here. I'm going to go ahead and save it. So the first function we have is the add item. And if I go back to my sheet, that's going to be this button, the add item. So basically I'm going to select a part, the quantity, I'm going to add it, and it's going to list it below here in these things. So the basic statements here is I'm getting my spreadsheet object, I'm defining my invoice sheet and my item sheet. I'm getting the last row of my invoice sheet, I'm getting the last row of my item sheet. And here I'm grabbing my part and quantity from my invoice sheet, and then I'm going over to my part sheet to grab the unit cost. So I'm kind of going through each row, trying to find which equals the part I selected, and then from there I'm grabbing the unit cost. And then the last thing I'm doing is going to the invoice sheet and populating into this table I got down here. So I'm grabbing this field, and the unit price field, and then populating it below here. So that's what this function does. The next function is the create invoice. Now this is the main function. This takes all the data that I have listed and populates the print sheet, which is the actual invoice. So in here I'm getting the spreadsheet object. I'm defining all these sheets, the invoice sheet, customer sheet, the setting sheet to grab the invoice number, and the print sheet. First thing I'm doing, I'm just grabbing the values off the invoice sheet. So I'm getting name, payables, payable to, project name, invoice number. Well, the invoice number I'm getting from the setting sheet. Then I'm taking that number and I'm adding 1 and I'm setting back the next value. So for my next invoice. Then I'm grabbing due date, note, and adjustment from my invoice sheet. So I'm grabbing all these fields from customer all the way down to adjustments, going over to settings and grabbing my number here. Now I'm grabbing when I get my customer, my name here, I need to go over to the customer's sheet and get the rest of this info, company name, street address, city, state, and zip. So that's what I'm doing next here. So I'm getting the last row of my customer sheet. I'm going through trying to find which row equals name, and then I'm grabbing company name, street address, city, state, and zip. So now I have all my customer data. The invoice date, I am generating the invoice date from the current date. So I'm going through all these functions to get my date into a nice string text the way I want it. So now I have my date field. And the next part is I'm going to go ahead and delete the item rows that are currently in the print sheet. So if I go over here to print, you see these rows like item 1, item 2 from the template 0, 0. I'm going to go ahead and delete these off because I'm going to add back the parts that I need. So that's basically what this is doing. It's counting each row I need to delete off, keep an account, and then I got accounts. I'm trying to find the starting period of 19, which is here, to how many I have to delete. And then this statement does the deleting, delete rows until I run out, depending on how many are populated. So now I have a clean print sheet to populate. So next I'm going to go ahead and start populating all the values I got, like submitted to date, name, company name, street, all this, all the boxes I got, all the cells I got that needs to be populated. And then one of the final things I do is I need to repopulate the parts back on here with the right values and everything. So that's this section. I'm getting the last row, so I'm getting whatever's populated down here and populating what's right here. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm going through each of the invoice, I'm finding it, I'm inserting a row to the print sheet, I'm getting my values from the invoice sheet, I'm doing some totaling to populate the totals as well, because I got to do the quantity times unit price to get my subtotal. And now I'm populating my print sheet with those values of part, quantity, unit price, and total price. And down here I'm doing a subtotal, so I'm adding up each line that I'm adding and putting a subtotal into that print sheet spot, which is right here. I'm doing this totaling right here. And my adjustments comes from my invoice sheet, and then the final price this is done by formulas that was carried over from the template for the final price. So that's done. Next I'm going to do my invoice log call. So before I do that, I'm getting my total invoice dollars, which is represented here. I'm taking that over to the next function I got is the invoice log, where I'm carrying these 5 values over. I'm getting the spreadsheet object, I'm getting the invoice log sheet, I'm getting the next available row, and now I'm populating these 5 fields into that row. And then the last button is the clear invoice. And basically what the clear invoice does is it doesn't do anything with clearing this. It just clears this out so you can start fresh. So I'm getting all those values, setting them to blank or a null value, and then I'm doing my parts table below. I'm just clearing all those records out. So those are the 4 functions I'm calling. Next I'll attach these functions to my buttons. So I'll start with clear invoice. I'm going to copy this. I'll right click, click here, assign, hit OK, go back up here, create invoice. And then add item. So the last thing we got to do is just generate a invoice. So I'm going to go over to customer, pick my customer, be able to project, due date, we'll adjust at -$2. We'll give them a break. We're going to pick our items. So item 1, quantity of 4. We may have to do a security check here. Or pick our account. We go to advanced. Go ahead and hit unsave. And then we hit allow. So we're going to have to redo that call, so I'm going to hit it again. Now that's populated. Let's go ahead and add another item. We'll add item 3. Another quantity of 4, so we got those 2 things. Now we go ahead and create our invoice. We got everything that we want on this invoice, so let's go ahead and create it. So it's finished. Let's go over to print. So we got up here my company invoiced on today with all the information with John Smith, payable, invoice number, building, our due date, our 2 items totaled up to 480, 400. That makes 880 minus $2, 878. And then we go over to our invoice log. It's listed here with our record with all our totals in there. So that concludes this video. Please leave any questions or comments below the video. Until next time.